Today I want to pick up where we left off. Last time we did an example with a for loop where we walked through all the options in list topics. Okay. And we walked through it. We created a variable loop. This is a for each loop that seemed to work. Okay. So the first thing I did is copied all of the options that are available. This is an array, excuse me, this is an array over to topics, and then walked through it. What I discovered this afternoon, because in my notes it said this doesn't work. And what I discovered is if you do something like this for variable topic in, that's what I did wrong, list topics. That doesn't work because that's a list box. If you said dot options, it still doesn't seem to work very well. Kind of chokes on that. So let me see, at least it did in my office. We'll see what it does here today. Always works different in my office. I don't have 10 of you looking at it telling me what's wrong with my syntax. Most of you have finished the Firebug lab, so I'm going to open that up as well. Somewhere, I apologize for it, somewhere there must have been a lab out there that was missing a step, because a couple of you didn't give me the command that you used to display the message if the number was too big. And so somewhere there was a bad lab out there. I think I've got them all replaced with new ones, but I apologize if I marked it wrong. Still want to see the answer that you had. And make sure that you use the assert function on that. That was the point, and that should be in my recordings. Sidetracked. Okay, so up here, here's my list of topics. And I want to know which ones were selected. And this is all, again, the onSubmit function. So as soon as we hit the submit button, then all this stuff happens. And it worked. Of course. I don't know what I was doing in my office that did not work. It just kept getting stuck on me. Yeah, they're all there. Weird. But this is the for each loop. In the for each loop, what this really does, it's a little confusing. Right? What this really does is give you the index of every item in options. Unlike other for each loops where it actually gives you the value, it doesn't here because each one of the options is actually an option tag with all kinds of stuff. So what the for each loop in JavaScript does is it gives you the index of every item in that loop. So let's try this a little different way. I'm going to put this back the way it was. That seems to be okay. Put this back the way it was. Now this says for every topic in topics. And notice what I had to say here, topics, subtopic. In most other languages, you would just say if this variable, topic, is selected. Well, it doesn't work that way. So inside here, let's create an array. I haven't done this yet. So I'm going to create an array called selected. And that's going to be an array. And we haven't seen this yet, but that instantiates a new array. And it is in most modern languages like Swift, you can just keep adding to the end of that. This is not a fixed size array. You can add things to it as we go, almost like a collection. So that's an array. If the object is selected, then instead of adding it to my message, I'm going to add it to, where'd that curly bracket come from? That's the for loop. I'm going to add it to my array. But how do I add it to the end? Well, I use the array length. Just like all other arrays, this is zero based. So if the length of the array is 0, this will add the new item to position 0. If the length of the array is 1, that means there already is 1 in position 0. This will add it always to the end of the array. Equals topics, subtopic, dot text. Remember, we discovered text is what's inside the option box and value is what the value clause designates. So whichever one of those you choose. And then after this is done, instead of writing the message that way, we can walk through the array again. So use another for each loop. For variable, this time I'm going to use the typical technique that you'll see on the web for a variable called s. In selected. You might want to do something like document.writeLine s plus a break. Remember, if we want to display on the screen, document.writeLines actually create an HTML page. If you want to move down to another line, you have to use the break command. But that won't work. In a way, it will. It won't give me an error, but it won't do what I want it to do. So let's see what that gives me. With any luck, it'll give me what I expect. That's what I expect, but that's not what I wanted. 0, 1, and 2. As I said, the for each loop, or the for loop, for variable loop here, I call it a for each loop. The for each loop in JavaScript works differently than the others. It doesn't give me the value, it gives me the index of each element in the array. Well, wouldn't that just be 0 through length? Yeah, it would be. But instead of doing a normal for each loop, which would look like this, I don't know if we've even seen any of them, but for variable s equals 0 as long as s is less than selected dot length, s plus plus, those two loops are identical. Even to the point where s has the same values, 0 through 2. If I've selected 3 of them. So this is just a little shorter. Instead of doing the plus plus, instead of designating the length, instead of designating where we're starting, we're going to get the indexes of all the elements in selected. But if you actually want to write something other than that, then you have to go into selected, my array, sub s. That should give me the 3 text objects that were selected. And it does. So that's something neato, yeah, but that's something I always have to remember, is that the for each loop in JavaScript does not work like any other for each loop in any other language. In every other language, and again, it's because I'm messing with objects and tags and all those kinds of things. In every other language, for each loop gives me the value. Same thing with the array here. It would give me the value of the element in the array, every single element, but not in JavaScript. In JavaScript, you simply get the index number of every element in the array, and it's just a shortcut to simplify this process.
And you can't just do s.value, you have to do the syntax.
No, because s is a number. So I'm asking if you say s.value, then because we saw the numbers it was spitting out, right? So that'd be getting the value of a normal integer, and that's probably a syntax error. Because s is not an object here, it's just the index, just. Then you use it that way. And that's why typically in my for each loops here, the s or the loop variable is just a single letter, so that inside my square brackets I don't have something as confusing as I had before, topics, subtopic, where topic is just an index. Often people will just use I left over from the old Fortran days. This is in the 70s. Fortran had a for loop, but you had to use integer loop counters, and the easiest variables to define as integers were I, J, K, L, M, and O. And so we use the I a lot as a loop counter. Those old guys are still around, still kind of do that, throw I's in there for index. Pardon me, or iteration, okay. Questions about that? All right. I don't even remember where I left off, but I think we never did get around. Did we do an inline if? I don't think we did. Converting inputs, decision constructs, case statements, inline if. An inline if in JavaScript, you must surround the condition with parentheses. Most other languages don't require that. Then a question mark, excuse me, then the value if it's true, a colon, the value if it's false. That's very similar to what we've seen in other languages. And one other little kicker here, if you try to concatenate that, like we often do with this extra S and stuff, if you try to concatenate it, you have to surround the whole thing with parentheses. Otherwise, it tries to concatenate just this first part here. And that doesn't work very well. So let's do an inline if after we're done here. And just do another document. Write line. You selected length dot. And then now here's where I would normally put the word items. But what if it's only one? So what I'm going to do instead is leave the S off. This is a little different than the example in my notes. And I'm going to concatenate an S or nothing. The inline if has parentheses around the condition. So if the selected length double equals 1 is what I usually check for. If it's 1, then give me nothing. Otherwise, give me an S. The condition has parentheses around it. Now this doesn't give me a syntax error, but it will crash when it won't work very well because it concatenates this and then it sees the question mark and it doesn't know what to do. So if I want to concatenate the entirety of this, I have to put parentheses around it. And then there's a parenthesis for the document write line. So the inline if is pretty similar to what we've seen in other languages. Make sure that works. Four items. One item. What happens if I select none? Control clicked it. Actually on the Mac option control clicked it. The question is, will it crash? No. And it puts the S back on again because it's not equal to 1. The only time this gets complicated is if you have decimals and you want S's 1.5 items, 3.5 items, but 1/2 item. And that gets a little more complicated, but you can sort that out. If you need it for doubles, it's not anywhere near as common. That's the inline if. It's not the only thing I use it for, but a pretty common use is just to throw S's on the end of things to make things a little more professional. Don't forget parentheses around the condition. That's the part I always leave out. We've already seen the for loop. Can use either one. This classic for loop. Start at 0 as long as we're less than the max. Bump it up by 1 every time through. I already created the new array and walk through it. Could use a for loop to print out the same text in 6 different tags. Sounds like fun. Let's give it a go. So now all of this stuff up here gets to be commented out. And I think the language is JavaScript, so that was Control Q, is that what it was? Slash. Nope. Language JavaScript. And then edit comment was Q. No, I don't have them highlighted anymore. Actually, that's not going to work, is it? Nope. Because I have comments inside, it's messing stuff up. So single line comment. There we go. Some of them it doubled up on, but that's okay. That way when I take them off, they'll leave those extra ones on there. So what do we want to do? We want to, using a for loop, for a variable c equals 1. I'm not walking through an array, so I like to start counting at 1 like humans do. As long as c is less than or equal to 6, bump it up every time through the loop. I can't put an h1 tag here. Why not? It's not HTML. I'm inside of a script. Okay? So if I want to generate an HTML tag, I have to generate it using my document write line. And this is good training because when we get to PHP, that's pretty much what we do. Generate a lot of HTML using a PHP equivalent of a write line. Murac, however, suggests that you do as much in HTML as you can and then do the rest of just the processing part in PHP. Everything else stays HTML. That gets funky looking after a while. You get some HTML, then a little bit of PHP embedded in it, some more HTML, a little more PHP embedded in it. Here we don't have that option. So I'm going to create an H tag, but I'm going to concatenate my counter. Close the tag, put in some text. And close it. Shouldn't need any breaks because H tags sit in a line all by themselves anyways. So here I've built HTML using JavaScript.
You have to close the right line. Parentheses.
I have to close HC.
Right line.
You have to have a close parentheses before the semicolon.
Darn document write line. Thank you. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So it's still in on submit. And if I wanted to get really elaborate, I could in here sample text for H and then put another one in there, another C. What I often do when I build these things is just write what I want it to be in HTML. And then take out the part, the ones, the twos, the H1s, the H2s, take out the part that varies and replace it with a variable. Get it to display with H1 over and over and over again. And then put the variable in to make sure my HTML syntax is right. But this is fairly simple, so we'll see how it goes. And if I just refresh, doesn't help. Now I can see what they look like. Yes, ma'am.
So can't you only have one document.writeLine in the JavaScript?
No, you can have as many as you want, but as soon as it hits one, it wipes out your page.
Okay.
As soon as a document writeLine is executed that is not embedded inside the HTML, like this is not embedded inside the HTML, it replaces your page with the contents of the document writeLine.
Okay.
But you can have as many of them as you want.
It just means if you're doing more processing, you just have to get all the data off the page first and then do everything
Right.
else.
If you're using JavaScript to do that. Get all the document, all the stuff off the page that you need. If there's a bunch of inputs, put them into variables, save them, and then start document writelining using all the variables.
Okay.
Questions about the for loop? And also questions about generating HTML. You can use JavaScript to generate HTML. The downside is once you execute a document write line, you've wiped out your HTML tags, you've wiped out all your stuff. All that's really left is the text that you're spitting out. So if you wanted to make a perfectly acceptable page, you'd have to put in the doc type, you'd have to put in the header, you'd have to put in the body tags and the HTML tags, and then all the stuff in between. But generally, our JavaScript doesn't do a lot of displaying. It manipulates objects that are already on the screen. If I go into the HTML here, I'd have to refresh that page. Turn on Firebug. Go into the body tag. Notice that this looks like it has the body tag, but it actually built those tags. So when I said you have to create the HTML and the head tag and the body tag, I lied. It looks like it gave us some generic ones just to get started. At least Firefox sees them. So they must be there. But I didn't create them, I just generated the stuff up above. But notice, at least in Firefox, you can look inside and see what kind of HTML you generated. So if it doesn't look right, maybe you can take a look at what did get generated and say, oh, here's why the angle bracket's missing, or whatever. You can also right-click and view the page source. Let's see what we see there. Same stuff, notice, without the body and the head. So Firefox at least, or Firebug at least, is assuming there's a body tag and an HTML tag in there and displaying it. Use a loop to display the same image in 10 different sizes, starting at 10%. Okay. I think you got the idea of a loop, but just so that you can see the idea of some more generating text, I believe that I have an image embedded in that folder. Those are boring. We may have to go into the other example. Hang on a second. Loops. There we go. Perfect image. Zombie Volker. It's a good picture. Okay. In the interest of Halloween. Actually, I have my mask on now. Normally, I just look like that. Gonna go in there. Thank you for one person laughing at least. Brandon just does not like my jokes. Never has. Especially when they're lame. All right, so let's bring this test in here, see what it does. Okay, here's the original width of my image. And this is resize the horizontal rule on load. JavaScript return, use a counter to control the loop. This is my JavaScript, should be able to use a document write line, and the rest of it we'll leave for later. That's on load. Wait a minute. Use a counter control loop. I wouldn't do it here. I have to be inside the onload function, so let's just comment that out. I'm curious, what happens if I put JavaScript in here? It works. We could have been testing inside the JavaScript tag all along. Okay. Where's this coming from? There must be some extra stuff in there a little lower that generates a form. There it is. Okay. Generates some stuff. Looks like I got code written for it, so let's see what happens here. Timer? Wow. Got kind of fancy. So there's the function make bigger. Where do I call the function make bigger? Function. Document right line does all of that stuff.
Make bigger
Hmm?
right in the middle, where it indents.
That's the function, but where do I call it?
Oh,
Down, down. Go down, that's all.
On the timer, but still the function needs to get started. And then the timer just makes it smaller and bigger, and that's interesting. Okay, so let's try this. This is the stuff I didn't get a chance to play with today because I was fighting with all the other things. Original size is still there, but the make bigger does not seem to be happening. Is it a little make? It's a JavaScript, should be able to call it. Image source, maybe I've got this that I gotta pull out too.
The size is 0.0.
Yeah, it starts really small and makes them bigger every half a second, but I think what I forgot to do is put the picture in here for it to work on. See if that helps. And that was all tied to the button, was supposed to be tied to the button, so I can take this out. And now if I save it and refresh the page again, there's a scare me button, and the button then makes the process start. The timer makes it go slow. If I didn't have the timer in there to increase its size every half second or so, it would happen instantaneously. You just see this big one instead of the small one growing. So this demonstrates a couple of things. It demonstrates a timer. And then if the percentage is less than 1, that means we've gotten real small, then we kill the timer. Otherwise, we start it back up again. But it's nice to see how to use a timer so that if you want to, I believe on my web page, my bio page right now, I have pictures of my families that cycle through. And every second or two, a new picture of a family member pops up using something very similar. The other part of it is I'm generating HTML, but in this case, no, I'm not generating HTML because the picture already exists. In this case, the make bigger function takes the original width of my picture and then changes it. So here I'm modifying an image on the screen. So the image is there, very small, right? Percentage of 0. And then the function kicks in and it has a timer that basically says every half a second, I believe that's half a second, it might be, have to look it up, it might be 50 thousandths of a second. Pretty sure it's thousandths of a second, that's what most languages use, so that's 50 thousandths of a second, and then I go through bumping it up by 100th all the time. I can watch it grow. I probably experimented with that the first couple times I wrote this until he grew at a reasonable rate. But the problem with this, it's called recursion. This function calls itself, right? Calls itself. There has to be an exit someplace. My PCT is a global variable. It's defined outside of a function, so it's automatically global in JavaScript. And we'll talk more about functions in the next unit, but in JavaScript, all variables outside of a function are accessible to all functions. They're global. and they retain their value for as long as the page is displayed when you refresh the page and it starts over again. So how do we get that button to work? Where did the button come from? Well, that was the other part. Here's an input that's a button. Where's the form? Here's another input that's a resize button. Where's the form? Inputs do not have to be on a form. They generally are, right? But they don't have to be. Particularly buttons like this. You can put buttons all over the place and make them do things and not necessarily put them into a form. The question then becomes, how do I respond to that button? Notice this is a regular button. Okay. And in this case, I used an on-click event embedded inside the tag. This is great for small little buttons like this, but normally I would write an on-click event handler. We'll learn how to do this. Write an on-click event handler in my JavaScript up above. Just like we did on submit, we can define an on-click event handler and tie it to this. But what this says is whenever you click on the button, make it bigger. Here's another one. That one doesn't have anything. So what does that input do when you click it? Probably goes up here. Here's my dollar function. There's the original width. And here's window on load. And what I have in there, I commented it out, but what I have in there is a button.resize.onClick. What I'm basically doing is wiring button resize click event to the resize horizontal rule function. So that function has to be somewhere, it's right here. And it gives you some tips there on how you can shrink it, basically shrinking the line down by 10%, changing its size, its font size, by 10%. And that line just shrinks, unfortunately, because there's only about 10 steps there. It's so small you can't even see it happen. It happens very, very quickly. And I could just use a loop, but I think I'll skip that part. So there's some nice code to steal later if you wish.
Is it stealing if you're technically giving it to us?
No, that's just my term for it.
What did you uncomment out there to make that work? I can't find.
Make the line work? Nothing.
The picture.
The picture. I uncommented the these two. There's HTML up here as well that needs to be uncommented. And then the rest was all the JavaScript. I didn't change any of the JavaScript as far as I can tell. Also note that this JavaScript is inside the body. Could have written it up above. Especially the function could be put anywhere. Did you find it?
No. Sorry.
59 and 60, line 59 and 60.
Okay. Justin was just trying this in Chrome, so in Firefox it seems to work okay, because this is Firefox. But if I launch this page in Chrome, hope I have Chrome Portable on here, should. Nothing happens.
The line is a different color too.
Yep, line's a little bit different. So I don't know if it's the set the timer that Chrome doesn't like. It's usually whatever Firefox likes, Chrome likes, just about the same. But here, obviously, it's different because it's the exact same page as launched it in Chrome.
IE doesn't work either.
In Firefox?
Internet Explorer does not work either.
Well, that doesn't bother me.
Is your Java updated?
Java enabled, probably. So he's saying that it doesn't work in Internet Explorer either. So it's interesting that that timer only seems to work in Firefox. Another one of those interesting things, if you build it, doesn't mean it's going to work in all the browsers. It's set timeout. Let's just do a quick little search here. Set timeout Chrome. Set timeout doesn't seem to work in Chrome. Set timeout function, trigger timeout. And the answer is switch your set timeout statement to the following. Set timeout, timeout trigger, but that's his timeout trigger. Is that the function? Yeah. Isn't that what I did?
T equals set timeout.
The difference is the parentheses and then the curly bracket. So let's see, set timeout. Make bigger without the quotes. Is that what he's saying? And without the parentheses. Oh, no, it doesn't work here. Oh, there he comes. A little slower this time. I think I stopped him by clicking on the button. He stops a little early. But does it work now in Chrome? No. So, something to play with. It seems to be a known issue that the command is a little bit different, and I don't use set timeout for a whole lot. I don't have a lot of things that are happening on the screen that need timers. So we'll leave it at that. I'm going to put it back the way it was because it was working a little better. All right, what's next in my notes? For each loop's where we took a look at. For in loop, for each loop returns the indexes of the value. We already talked about that. There are post-test and pre-test loops using do curly bracket, just like we did in C#. And then there's a pre-test loop that starts with a while, then a condition, curly brackets. So in the interest of time, let's take a break here while you guys are on break. I'm going to test this code and make sure I can get it to prompt until we get something that's not empty.